All right, so you can see that I'm reassembling the bike after getting it freshly painted. And don't forget that the whole point of me doing this was to convert this old analog EMTB, or not EMTB, just regular old MTB, into an EMTB using a CYC Stealth Generation 3 motor. Stick around. All right, so I'm going to start the process of installing the Stealth Generation 3 right here into my bottom bracket and getting this converted into an e-bike. As you can see, I've pretty much installed all the other components. There are some cabling issues that I'm going to have to deal with, but for the most part, this should be ride ready as soon as I connect up the motor and the battery. Okay, so let's take a look and see how this is going to come together. If you haven't done so already, I do have a video that I'll link right up there, which is just the unboxing to show you what all comes in the box for the Stealth. And so if you want to see that, certainly go ahead. I'm not going to really go through all the parts here as I'm building it up. I'm just going to simply put things together. All right, so this is the... Here we go. Is it going to focus on this? This is the throttle. I should change the lighting slightly here. Okay, so here I have in my hand the throttle. I think my plan will be to put this on the left side. All right, so I think this is how I'm going to end up doing it. It's, I got the grip there, followed by the throttle, and then the brake, and then the dropper post. We'll see if it works out. Okay, a couple things I just wanted to show you all here. Notice that I've installed the grip here, and then I have my brake cable and my shifters, and then I did mount the display over here. It's a pretty significant gap. That's not ideal, but in some ways I couldn't get that much closer, because if you look in there, you can see that I have the kind of brake cable and shifter arrangement where they're connected to each other. And so this block that you see right there of metal prevents me from being able to slide this any closer to the collar that holds the brake lever to the handlebar. So that's what I'm going to have to deal with. I would say that the biggest challenge with eMTBs is the cable management, because there are so many more cables, obviously, associated with the controlling and with the brake cutoff switches, connection to the display, etc. And so I've done my best here. I'm not thrilled with having these thick, ropey looking things, but it's better than having this sort of spider's web of cables. You can see here that I actually ran out of that wrap, so I need to do it on this side as well. And then the biggest issue is going to be coming around here to the side. How am I going to hide that away? Fortunately, I am going to mount my battery on the down tube, and so there will be some room to sort of lay cable alongside the battery. It's just hard to make an e-bike that is a converted e-bike into something that looks as clean as either an off-the-shelf eMTB or just a regular analog MTB. Okay, so I have here the speed sensor. This is the piece that mounts on the chainstay itself, and it is adjustable sort of inward and outward so that you can be sure to place it as close to the magnet that spins around on the wheel as you possibly can. Attached it via these two zip ties, and then so I encountered my first problem here, and that is that if you look carefully, and there's no way you're going to be able to see this no matter how close I get, because it's just too dark in there. I can't even focus in on there. But the bottom bracket, the shell itself on the inside is not perfectly smooth, and there are some little raised ridges that are, not the threads, obviously, for the bottom bracket itself. And what's happening is you can't actually slide the CYC motor, the sort of tube, that goes through the bottom bracket shell. You can't slide it in there. So I'm going to have to probably take a Dremel or a file of some sort to smooth out those rings in there. So that's kind of a bummer, but I guess to be expected, because clearly bottom brackets aren't things that fill the bottom bracket shell. So, you know, they were never made to do that. And this the tubes that insert in the Stealth, so this tube right here. Okay, so this tube, it goes quite a bit deeper, right, than the tubes of a bottom bracket. And then similarly, the tube here on the motor, if I can get it in focus here, there, that tube right there, also goes much deeper than your typical bottom bracket. You can see that's the point where I got as deep as right there, that line that you can see there, and then I hit some resistance. So got to do some sanding out, removal. So this is my buddy. This is what was able to get out of the low. So I had basically things hanging down inside of the bottom bracket shell that needed to be removed, and now it looks like it's still pretty tight, but it's much better, so it looks like it's going to work. It took me about 45 minutes to do it because I wanted to proceed carefully so as not to damage my bottom bracket shell. Okay, so I have a 68 millimeter bottom bracket, so I had to insert the 3 millimeter washer into there, or spacer I should call it, and then I have to go and reattach the plate on the other side. Alright, so as you can see, I reinstalled this plate right here. You have to take it off in order to fit the motor through from the other side, from the drive side. And then I've installed 2 washers. Very hard to see here, but there are 2 washers right in here. And then this is the other side of the bottom bracket that I'm actually screwing in, right? So you can see it's screwing in nice and easily. And I'll crank that thing down, get it nice and tight. So, you know, once I was able to auger out the bottom bracket shell, piece of cake to put this thing together. So importantly, I haven't tightened it all the way. You know, I'll see what the torque specs are for it, but that's because I want to install the bracket that keeps this thing from rotating under torque. That's going to hold it up underneath the underside, so I want to get that installed before I tighten this right on down. All right, so you can see here that it's pretty much fully installed. Most importantly, I did put in this piece right here, which is the part that prevents the whole motor from rotating down and away from the top to the down tube there. And that's actually one of the major things that I think is a huge advantage of CYC over Bafang motors, is that Bafang requires you to basically tighten it up along the bottom bracket so tightly that it digs into the frame and in some ways damages the frame, so that it's hard to go backwards from having a Bafang. You can't return it back to an analog bike. So that's not the case here, because this takes that weight, right? It prevents the rotation of the motor down and away, so you don't have to tighten it with nearly the kind of torque. And I'm pointing to the wrong side. On the other side is the side that I'll be torquing it down to tighten it up so that the bottom bracket brings everything together. The biggest thing here, the next step, is to put in the spindle. And this spindle is pretty awesome. A couple reasons. One, I'll come over there and show you here. If you notice here, this actually has, let me move the lighting a little bit better here. This is a splined spindle. And again, this is another thing where if you look at what Bafang has to offer, Bafang has a square taper, and square tapers are okay, but they're certainly, they loosen up, they warp, they actually, you know, sometimes have to get replaced, or often have to get replaced after some period of time. This is like such a beautifully machined piece of equipment here. So I'm going to go ahead and put the grease on here and then throw on the crank arms. Okay, so here's my left side, I mean right side or drive side crank arm. I'm going to go ahead and grease up the splines and then chuck this guy on.
Not sure if you can pick up on this, but I used white electrical tape to route my speed sensor wire. And so you can see that it goes, first of all, it goes on behind the chainstay, and then I wrap it down and around, and then the connector goes up through here and then connects it to the controller, which you can see right there. And you can see this gargantuan mess. It's really, I'm not quite sure what to do with all the cordage there. It doesn't sort of lay down very well. I think I'm just going to sort of hide it on this side of the bike inside of 1-inch braided tubing. So at least there'll be a single tube going down there, and then I will probably zip tie it with clear zip ties. Okay, so I'm doing close to the final step, wrapping up here. Putting the chain back on. It's the same chain I had when I was running this thing as an analog bike, and I checked the stretch of it, and it seems like it's in good. Whoa! Did I just hit the camera? Sorry about that. It's in good shape, so there's no need for me to replace it. So let me go ahead and thread this through. For any of you who don't have them already, you should get one of these tools that both break the link and put it together. It's got to be one of the handiest tools that I own. So it's Park Tool MLP 1.2. I mean, these Park tools are always amazingly good tools. All right. So let's check and see if this got out of whack. Oh, looks like it's in pretty good shape. Whoa. What is that? What am I hearing? Oh, it's my... For some reason, the derailleur cable got bent slightly. It's playing the banjo. Okay. Still an adjustment. Coming down a little bit slower. Might need a little adjustment later on, but it looks pretty good. Alright, so you can see here that I actually went ahead and installed the CYC brake cutoff switches because the Fang ones just weren't working, and I'm not sure why. There was no problem with the magnet in place here. That worked pretty well, but for some reason it just wasn't doing the brake cutoff correctly, and I had set it up to do so inside of the app, so it should have been working. But you can see these really work very well because there's sort of this blue, the blue light indicates that the connection is all there and you can actually use the motor, whereas when it turns red, when I activate the brake, that indicates that it's cut off the connection and therefore you can't use the motor, or the motor does cut off. So these work pretty nicely. Pretty easy to install as well. Alright, so just a couple things. I've actually been riding it now for about a month, and I do want to draw your attention to a couple things. It's wonderful. It's a great motor, and it really makes this bike a heck of a lot of fun. But I will tell you that these do loosen up over time, so you're going to have to make sure that you torque them down every now and then. And then importantly, sort of the entire bottom bracket assembly does loosen up. So let me turn the bike around for a moment just so I can show you. This is the point where things can loosen up because you actually can't, well, I couldn't figure out how to properly torque it down. And I have seen a couple of folks who have assembled this Stealth, and they've basically used a mallet along with their bottom bracket tool. And so not the most accurate way of tightening up and torquing down your bottom bracket, but I think it seems like that was the way to go. I tried to do that. I don't have a lot of room on my bike to do that without really thwacking my frame by mistake, so I was a little bit gentler than I probably should have been. Anyway, it loosens up and you'll hear it because it'll click and creak on you. And the other piece here is that this retaining ring, which is something that I did not mention earlier in the video, it's super important that you go back through and tighten this guy back down as well, and that you have it put on correctly, because it's not something you can put on backwards because it won't be able to sort of allow your bearings to move freely while at the same time, putting pressure on them to hold the whole thing together. So you have to be thoughtful about that. The other piece here is that I did put in 2 spacers here. It felt like there just was, this crank arm was going on a little bit too deeply, and it didn't allow me to tighten it down as much as I wanted to. It sort of hit its limit, and then it couldn't tighten it down further. So I do have 2 of these spacers in here, as opposed to just the 1. Okay, and another thing you'll note here is that I now have this this covering for my wiring, which neatens up things tremendously here. But you'll notice that I actually have it attached with a couple of these zip ties. Just drilled out a couple of slots here. It really made it so it's nice and steady now in terms of holding the wires up here. So this doesn't look too different, but there's one noticeable change that I made that actually is quite significant in terms of its performance. I have the grip here, and then I have the thumb throttle right here. Importantly, I rotated this thumb throttle down quite a bit, so now if you need to push this, you sort of need to push around and forward more than I had it before, which is where I just had to push downward on it. The problem with its location is that I sometimes hit it by mistake when I meant to change my dropper post or drop my my seat post. So this makes it just a lot harder for me to mistakenly push down on the throttle when I mean to push down on my remote for my seat post. So as I said in the earlier part of this video, one of the most difficult things to do is to deal with all the crazy spiderweb of wires that come out of your bike, and especially up here in the cockpit area. And so I had already shown you that I sort of contained a wire in here, and then I did add this one so that it's sort of, you'll see they terminate just before they get to this larger one right here. I actually think that it looks fairly clean, so it's not as good as an analog bike in terms of how clean it could look. And obviously I have a fairly old mountain bike frame that doesn't allow for routing any of my wiring through my tubes. Everything's on the outside. Okay, in the next video I'm going to show you all sort of how this thing performs. I'll take some shots of me riding the actual bike, and most importantly I'm going to do a comparison test between my Commuter, which is a rear hub electric bike, and compare the sound that makes to this new Stealth Generation 2 sound. I know that's something that's on the minds of a lot of folks who are interested in these CYC motors. All right, be on the lookout for that video. Bye.